the lies in due diligence, and it's like part of the industry is to lie. If you only sold security solutions to the people who needed them, you'd go out of business immediately, right? Because they're all so hyper niche and specific. So when the bad guys figure out a defect first, all the patching in the world's not going to fix it.
Most security teams are still playing defense like it's 2015. They're patching faster, buying another tool, and chasing the latest headlines. But what if that's the wrong model entirely? This week, I'm joined by Jerry Perullo. He's the founder and CTO over at Adversarial.com, and he's the former longtime CISO at the Intercontinental Exchange, the $100 billion company that owns critical infrastructure like the New York Stock Exchange. On top of that, he also teaches security as a professor over at Georgia Tech, and he's the co-host of the Adversarial Podcast. But Jerry and I are going to get into what most organizations are getting wrong about risk. We'll talk about why many security teams seem to obsess over the wrong things, and get into why, in the age of AI hype, vulnerability management is probably overdue for a rethink. So if you've ever been wondering how to answer, what are we doing about mythos and the phone-pocalypse? Well, this is going to be a good episode for you. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Threats, Pitfalls, and Risk Myths, the TPRM Podcast. I'm joined today by Jerry Perullo. Thank you so much for coming on, Jerry.
Oh yeah, Nate, it's great to see you. Always fun conversation. Be fun to have one that's recorded.
Jerry, I know you've got a long and storied history. You were securing the New York Stock Exchange as the CISO for Intercontinental Exchange for like 20 years.
Yeah.
You're doing teaching at Georgia Tech now. You got adversarial.com. Wonderful domain.
Thank you.
Working on risk management. Yeah, I mean, it's really great to be able to speak to you about some of the experiences you had. I mean, especially when it comes to the stock exchange, I think that's extra
Cool.
interesting because, I mean, you had such a long run, which in and of itself is kind of standout, but I don't recall ever seeing the stock exchange in the news for anything bad or any sort of breaches. And that's, that's something to say because I'd have to imagine that you were fairly targeted there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the household brand for sure. And so the parent company, Intercontinental Exchange, which we have to spell out because if you just say ICE, everybody's like, oh God, I know they had.
Oh, you're working for ICE.
They're really targeted. Right. Yeah. But ICE, that ICE, I started in 2001, so it was 20 years, a little over 20 years, like you said. And it was relatively small, but pretty quickly picked up a lot of targeting and interest because it was we were designated critical infrastructure because we ran like the oil markets. Like even today, ICE is the predominant player in oil markets, and we started overseas, so we had all this cross-jurisdictional considerations to deal with and all that too. So in our minds, we were super important, but it wasn't a household name, and nobody that I talked to at a dinner party, if there's such things, would know what I was talking about. And then in 2013, after a number of, in our minds, really notable acquisitions, then we bought the stock exchange and kind of got on the map. And it was a different animal as far as the PR goes. But I think the most unique thing about it was being a parent company with a lot of different subsidiaries that had different threats and threat profiles. The stock exchange was the one people all thought of, but we ran the gamut as far as targeting and interest and ideological reasons people would want to do something bad.
Yeah, and it's its own separate set of problems because you guys did a bunch of M&A, and bringing those in, I know, is always interesting when you find it's like Christmas, you get to open the present and see what happened, and sometimes you just get a box of socks.
Yeah, it's funny. If we're going to go with that analogy, I'm willing to play ball. It's like Christmas, except that you're promised the gift in advance in excruciating detail. It's really painted out, right? It's like, oh, don't worry, Nate. Yeah, you're going to love what you get for Christmas morning, and also known as due diligence. And
yep.
The lies in due diligence, and it's like part of the industry is to lie. If you didn't lie, I don't think you would invest in you. Like you wouldn't be good at.
I mean, everything's great here, obviously.
It's strategy,
really,
right?
Top tier, cutting edge.
Yeah, and the trick is for people to lie right to the edge where it's not quite material enough for someone to try to unwind the deal after the close. Security certainly gets short shrift there. Promise the world.
I think you end up with lots of omission is where I've usually seen it pop through.
Yeah,
you didn't maybe mention that, but
and I love it. Like M&A to me is the ultimate TPRM, right? Because you ask all this stupid questions, but instead of just like filing in the results off, now you ostensibly get to see.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, I think Well, one of the interesting things, when it comes, because we were talking about threats that you're facing when it comes to like the exchanges, because we see a lot of people talking about, threat-based risk or risk-based this and that, and a lot of that stuff ends up being used interchangeably, but I know you've sort of got some strong feelings on how people approach this. Can you maybe dive into that a bit more? When you're thinking about how you're prioritizing stuff, when you look at threats versus risks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're right. Like one of the things I always say, and I kind of go through the same thing where like when I was at ICE, we came up with a structure and a taxonomy and a vocabulary. And then I went on to, like you said, teach at Georgia Tech. So teach an enterprise security management class where it's the same thing again. It's the same concept again, like how to think about the problems. And then adversarial risk management, that's the adversarial.com. We have a SaaS platform. It's a system of record, risk register, incident register. So it's the same concepts all over again, except now we're of course trying to embody them and do all the cool stuff that we wish we could have done before. And what I say, especially in class where I get the chance to kind of preach this and test it out, is that there's not necessarily a wrong definition of terms or wrong usage. I mean, there are some, but generally there's no gospel in all this stuff, and we're all making it up as we go along as security leaders. So the main thing is just to have agreement within your use case, right? Like you walk into a company, if they want to call it a caboodle or whatever, that's fine. Just make sure everybody that's talking in the room has read the instructions and is on the same page. So with that massive caveat, to me and for us, we use threats for the high level, and it's specifically threat objectives. We taxonomize threats by what they're trying to accomplish rather than the who or the what or the how. We focus on the why. So an example would be extortion as a threat objective. Malware or ransomware is a means to that end, but so is data blackmailing and all these other different things you could do. DDoS for Bitcoin, all that stuff. Extortion is the motive. And that's great because it's fairly durable, and the people that are interested in extorting you are fairly consistent. It doesn't flip overnight. Whereas like when you see those top risks, like surveyed CISOs, and the top threats, or I should say, are malware and followed by ransomware and an insider threat. And what if, an insider deploys malware and it turns out to be ransomware? And what bucket do I put it in? It's lack of parallel constructs. So we start with threats at a very high level, and we say organize them by the objective. And then for us, risk, and this is where it gets really contentious, or it's not the way everybody does it, is most organizations, I literally had a CISO recently tell me that the head of enterprise risk said, hey, will you stop please using the word risk in all your program documentation and your operations? Because that's like our word. Like, we use risk and belongs to the risk department and your security. And so you don't get to use that word. And I know the guy was like probably reacting to like some tactical pains, and I totally get it. He's probably trying to do the right thing here, but metaphorically or illustratively, it shows the whole problem. Like cyber is just a risk, and we need to realize that. So for us, risk is this superset of items that includes vulnerabilities. And I personally, just because I don't want to drag the rest of my team into the crosshairs that this will bring on, but I personally hate the concept of vulnerability management as a department or a job because it maps to CVEs and software defects, but a configuration error or like leaving a debug flag on doesn't qualify as a vuln. So vulnerability management's built all this great rubric around scoring them and risk-based vulnerability management, and then a config error or a bad procedure or anything like that doesn't benefit from any of those because it's not a vuln. So I like to just call them all risks, devote all that attention and that rubric around scoring things and consistency around risk broadly, and say the same thing that's good for scoring a vuln should also be scoring AppSec findings and CSPM and procedural weaknesses and audit findings.
Yeah, and I think, I actually had something. I had something similar where someone was asking me about how to write an AI policy, and I think along the same lines, I was like, why would you have an AI policy? Which of course sounds dumb when I say it, but I'm like, that AI is in everything you're doing. You should be asking why aren't we accounting for AI in all of the different policies that we have, not some policy that says how you use AI or whatever. I think it's sort of a similar parallel there. When it comes to security programs, then is that something that leads to things being too abstracted to how attackers behave? Because I like what you're saying there, which was, if I'm hearing it correctly, is your focus more on like the motivations that the attackers are going to have, which I think enables you to be more aligned with what actually would happen instead of
just thinking about these kind of point weaknesses in a vacuum.
Yeah, I think anytime that you endeavor to define a vocabulary or a way or a model, right, for thinking of them, ideally you have a benefit of creating that. Like, once we're done with this, it may not be perfect, but it's going to enable us to, and then some kind of thing you're trying to do here. And I think that's true of what we're talking about with security scoring and defining risks versus threats. And so the outcome that I'm looking for out of defining this threat taxonomy, there has to be one, right? There's a few of them. One of them is just to steer the discussion at the board level of, hey, did you hear about the Equifax breach? What are we doing about that? Like, as a security leader, that happens. And sometimes, I mean, if you're a good security leader, there's going to be some like, oh yeah, that's stupid, or who cares about that, or that's not relevant to us, or yeah, they don't know what they're doing at all, and that's a totally different ballgame. But those aren't the right answers in that situation, right? Because you don't want to sound defensive or evasive. You want something that, starts with kind of like, oh, great point. Yeah, you've been paying attention, and how that maps into the ongoing cadence. Every quarter we always talk, and this is how that's consistent. And there's always got to be room for like, yeah, that's moving things on us, and we got work to do, certainly. But you also need
never
to
let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, a lot of times it's legit. And if it's not anything you need to worry about, it's good to be able to say like, yeah, we ran it through our process, and the result of that says that it's a nothing burger, but here
you don't want to look surprised is kind of the main thing.
Yeah, which is a challenge in itself. Yeah. But by organizing by objective, that keeps it finite. Like in our case, we use 6 threat objectives: extortion, sabotage, data disclosure. I won't try to name all 6, or I'll name 5 and stall out. But it's high level enough that we could talk to like board directors about it and say like, we're worried about extortion here, and the reason is everybody's getting attacked for extortion and we have money, so it's not a surprise. We're not worried about sabotage because we're not critical infrastructure and we're not politically active. And that's useful at a board level because it's saying, let's not get politically active. If you want to, that's great, but no, it'll have implications, and let's plan around that, and let's not be caught flat-footed. And then it becomes like in the CTI parlance, a collection priority, or a collection filter. So when you're reading the news, or when a board director walks in the room, or whatever it may be, to be able to say like, oh, okay, that TTP that was Iran exercised against a hydroelectric dam in Israel last week, that's a sabotage-related TTP. Doesn't mean it can't be used by others, but it means because we enjoy not being in that crosshairs for sabotage, we can get to that a little bit later. And we can focus right now on what threat actors in our space are doing, and extortion threat actors. And, that very model, like some people will say, well, look, any TTP that's used anywhere could be used anywhere else. And that's somewhat true. But look, we do not have to defend being the first target, the patient zero. If all we did was learn from patient zero, and if we banked on no one getting us to like the 5th or 6th wave of attacks, we'd be fine. Like it would just be such an edge case, the one person who, and if you're going to be patient zero, if you're going to have like nation state malware and all that, and then you're not looking for any tips right now, I hope. But for the rest of the entire planet, to be able to say like, oh, that's just happening in a wartime theater right now, and the minute it starts getting employed in like fraud, then to pay attention and tune in and do something about that works. That's okay.
No, and I think that's a great way of kind of putting things, for the board, but also just for other folks that you're maybe talking with, because it makes it much more relatable and understandable, I think, to people that are not necessarily dealing with risk and security every day. And then the other point you had there, just making it where it's clear that there's a trade-off, right? Like you have limited resources, you need to spend them where it makes the most sense. And ensuring that they understand this is why we're not looking at it. Like, yes, in a perfect world, if I have a multi-billion-dollar budget, sure, we'll count for that too. But that doesn't make good sense for us to do that. Yeah, is that?
I think like senior leadership, like through boards and all of that. What they love, what lights them up more than anything else is hearing trade-offs, hearing compromises, right? Not, we're the best. We fix all the problems. They know that's a lie. But when you say like, here's why we're not working on that right now, it's kind of, it's saying we're saving some money here. We're allocating our resources wisely. We're stewarding what you've given us. we have a system set up, so it will come to our attention if we need to spend time and money on it, and we could talk about it. Those are the right answers.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly like you said. It's building that confidence and setting the stage too, because maybe the 1% chance thing did happen, and then it's, do you have a way to go back and look and like, did we assess this risk incorrectly? In addition to, we're going to respond to that, but how do you get that continuous feedback loop rolling?
Yeah, I love to say intentionality is king, specifically when it comes to the place where we come up with risk-based vulnerability management, risk-based everything else. Those conversations come up when we're trying to explain to, like, when we just got out of a regulatory meeting and we're all powwowing, and how do we tell them we're not going to block printing at home? And what we're trying to say when somebody
the big risk
up is like, we're trying to tell them, let's tell them we made a risk-based assessment. Okay, cool. I'll start writing a report now. I'll bust out the Claude and it'll say, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, intentionality is king, and it's our right. It's the right inclination to say, like, if we prove we've thought it through, then we have something. And by the way, it's too late at that point, right? You want to show is the reason we didn't block it 6 months ago and never have is because we've did and memorialized that nice, we used to call it a rap sheet, risk assessment profile, 1 page max. And it said, likelihood and impact, inherent, what do we got, residual, done. So intentionality is everything. Setting the threat objectives and just saying, hey, this company, our marching order is extortion, not sabotage, not data. And by the way, everyone thinks data is security. Not true. There's places where data is not really targeted, not really valuable. Most people's intellectual property is not really a cyber threat. It takes a real grown-up to admit it. Yeah.
No one wants your crappy code for that one thing you do.
Right. Yeah. And getting that articulated and memorialized up front. Then when you're in that room coming out from the regulator, you're like, oh, well, this work that we've done, quarter after quarter here about our threat profile at a high level, we can use that. We can leverage that to defend the decisions that we make tactically.
No, perfect. Yeah. And I mean, I love the idea of intentionality as well. I mean, I've always told people I'm working with, it's, we can make either decision, but we need to make the decision mindfully.
Yeah.
Of here was the trade-off. Here's what we're trying to do, not just no one made a decision and so we kind of fell into it. And that's what we're doing now. I think that really drives a lot of, if you can have that sort of rigor program, you're much better set up to ensuring, I guess, that even when you do make mistakes, it's something you can learn from and again, drive that continuous improvement.
Right. If you can reveal the rationale and the thinking behind something, and you could like wind it back and be like, okay, we had a bad outcome here. What was our thinking? Oh, here's a flaw in our thinking. Let's adjust that, and then put it back on autopilot and make better decisions going forward. And AI allows a lot of that too, doesn't it? And prompt governance, I call it.
Prompt governance. Yeah. I mean, there's so much stuff that we need to sort of expand into with all of this now. And it usually ends up being an extension of what we already have, maybe back to the AI policy thing, but certainly a bunch of new fronts all over the place. I was curious, when it comes to, again, like the stock exchange thing, I mean, how did that change how you think about security and problems and even, were there traps you had to look out for just due to the, like, if I'm thinking of me securing the stock exchange, I would, probably not sleep well at night most days. Just the thought of what would happen if things go bad there, much more material than probably most of us deal with day to day. How did that, how could that have affected you? And how did you think about that, when it came to making sure you stayed rational when you're dealing with potential consequences?
Yeah. Like leading up to that. So that was 2013 and we'd been at it for 12 years or so. We were a public company. We went public in 2005. So we were a fairly mature company, and our market cap was like, I remember it because I'm going through the deal. We were in the 10 to $15 billion range. And so was the New York Stock Exchange. And so it was like almost a merger of equals economically. But, and that's, now the ICE is over $100 billion market cap. So it's continued to grow. But back then it wasn't nothing. And that's fairly substantial. And we had already established that threat objective lens on things. And the main reason, or one driver we did, is that we already were a conglomerate of different subsidiaries that had different threat profiles. That was the main reason, was not only to say, what do we not have to worry about, but for this given entity or subsidiary, what do we have to worry about? And in that case, we started out, I'm staring at the ceiling so I can remember everything, but we were running exchanges. We were running high frequency trading, futures and options markets around oil, natural gas, coffee, cotton, sugar, like all the ags, all that kind of stuff. and they were all in the crosshairs during wartime. And so we had to say, why is it that we need to focus more on DDoS attacks or fuzzing like through the high frequency interfaces and jamming bad data and creating a denial of service through the matching end or something? God forbid, that would have been a catastrophe, right? That was the bad day. And it wouldn't take someone in Iran or North Korea, that much time, even without having a co-pilot, to figure out that would be a cool way to put a black eye on the Western economy and all that. So we had already been down that road. And at the time that we were securing high frequency trading and transactional platforms, if you will, like low latency platforms, the word on the street was Equifax and Home Depot and Target and all these breaches. And that only could drive us and the board, but it would drive the regulators, right? They're walking in the room and, what are you doing about encryption at rest? What are you doing about key management? And the answer was, who cares about that? Like, there's a time and place. And in the military sphere, there's counterintelligence and misinformation and people trying to send bad signals. And in the private sector, it's not so much. Like, when you're at Target, there's not, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would venture to guess at Home Depot, there's not like an espionage group that's trying to send bad signals into Target's decision making. Generally,
I was at Target right before that happened. I don't think we had one of those.
Okay, good. On the offensive side, right? And then you feel like, okay, I'm probably not worry about on the defensive side of that as well. But what does exist in the private sector is the vendor FUD. And it's just as bad. And, you're trying to...
Potentially worse, because it's they had a lot of monetary incentive to raise all the fears and drive uncertainty.
Yeah. Right, like someone comes out with a new encryption enclave solution, Andreessen's behind them for $35 million. And now you got that whole machine and apparatus pumping money through marketing to convince everybody that this is their top priority, no matter who they are. Because if you only sold security solutions to the people who needed them, you'd go out of business immediately. Right, because they're all so hyper niche and specific. You think through the whole neat stuff, but like not everybody needs it. But you need to sell to everybody else who doesn't need it too to stay alive, to justify the valuations. So that's what you're fighting against, right? So we're running a stock exchange. Hey, what happened to Equifax? I hear that we need to be doing tokenization of data, and then specific good example. A piece of news came out that said, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was BAE that did it. I love being unaffiliated and able to like throw names out. Who cares? So I think it was BAE out of the UK that published an article saying that they interviewed. That's what it was. It wasn't them that was the bad guys. They interviewed Trend Micro and like whoever the CTO was at the time for this article about sophisticated hacking on stock exchanges specifically. And so our collection priority said, that's one. Let's get it on the front here. And it said that they had spoken to people at exchanges that had shared with them stories about how Eastern European criminal gangs had intercepted order flow, so like buys and sell orders, and front run and sent them to their people in Eastern Europe and their systems, let's say, who would then say, oh, okay, somebody is about to buy a lot of this stock. Let me quick jump in and throw in a bunch of buy orders before and benefit from that. And so that story ran. We got wind of it. I knew some people were going to ask about it. So instead of just preparing for, I think it's a mess out there. I think most CISOs would have said, that's fact. We need more money. We need an inquiry.
I'm already like, how would they intercept these?
Yeah, exactly. Like for one, how do they intercept them? And then secondly, anybody in security, your first line of business is the business and trying to make things work and then make them work secure. And making the business work in those days at a high HFT platform was latency. Hey, Jerry, in case we strip the firewalls out, cable lengths. And like the firewalls, like 5 milliseconds and 10, 20 milliseconds of latency, that's not going to go. We were pulling out firewalls, using load balancers instead, do everything in hardware that we could. And so I was super latency sensitive. So to tell me that we're going to even think about sending something across the, what's that, a 200 millisecond drop over to Eastern Europe. And we're talking nanoseconds at this point, decisioning. So how the hell are you going to even view, no less, then float an order? Like you couldn't do that even if you were connected with a fiber run in the co-located. So something didn't add up to me.
Physics is terrible there.
Yeah, exactly. Physics was working against the whole story. So I remember in that particular case, it was out of the UK. That's why I said I thought it was BAE, and it might have been. But I remember in that case, just pinging the Bank of England, like, hey, it's a really big deal here. And supposedly some exchange was getting hacked and orders from Eastern Europe. And like, I'll tell you one thing, it's not us. Checked it out. It's definitely not us. But we need to know who it is. And you're the government. So why don't you get to the bottom of it? And they sent some people out to get to the bottom of the story. And then it turned, and I remember it was because I had asked the people who were quoted first.
Emphasis
said, well,
on story in that statement, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, what I was told, cell phone, was I can't reveal my sources, but so we send them off, and it ended up being a completely retracted. It was a red. It was the face saving was it was a red team scenario that got out of hand and accidentally went to the press. That's the level of crap that we're up against. Had I not pushed it, how many millions of dollars of running in circles would we have wasted on nothing? So that's counter espionage in the private sector.
No, I think that's a really great way of looking at it is, versus nation states where you do have people trying to plant things. I mean, in our case, we end up with vendors trying to plant fears about things that, maybe aren't the thing you should be worried about. I think, especially with AI, we see a ton of this more generally. And
when all you have when all you sell is hammers, your job is to convince everybody that everything's a nail.
Yeah, they'll have a pile of nails. Is there some sort of methodology you use, when you think about, basically when you're looking at any of these problems? Because I think this is something that I see as well, really broadly, when I'm talking to people, where I'm constantly like, I don't think you're worried about the right thing. What's your process when you're thinking through, whatever the problem is, or when someone raises something? How do you approach that?
I'm going to talk about CRQ. I'm not a fan of CRQ in general, cyber risk quantification. But immediately my mind's going there and trying to answer your question here. So you take these threat objectives and then you got to rank them somehow. And then there's your collection filters and your defense for why things don't matter. If something comes in, that's mapped to sabotage. And we all agree sabotage is not a big deal here. So we can wait, right? Some new TTP, if it was only being used in sabotage attacks, I'm saying wait till it gets being used in extortion. And then because that's what we're more focused on, then we'll do whatever we have to do to defend against it. So the reason I brought up CRQ is, you get into well, how do you value the importance of sabotage or whatever it may be? The way that I do it, and I like it. It's pretty good. It's imperfect like everything else, and hopefully it'll only get better. But is the good old likelihood and impact heat map. And then the question that comes up where the CRQ comes in is, are those axes discrete or continuous? Right? Is there a mathematical equation that comes up with the X value and the Y and then multiply them and all that?
I tried it with the equation before, and I don't know that was much more, any better.
Right?
There's more work.
So what we do, and what many of us have done for many years, is admittedly qualitative. Right? So we do a 5x5 matrix, and we have these words that are in each of the fives, and they're unlikely. I think it's remote, unlikely, possible, probable, imminent. Boom. Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's kind of where everybody's been for a while now here. And then they get into, nobody phrased it like this, but how do you deterministically come up with the same bucket every time? Probable means probable.
That's the challenge.
And what I love is, so most relatively mature companies have some kind of, they're asked at some point, TPRM, reg, what's your risk management procedures? And then at that point, the first time they get that question, they rush off and Google, and then they find the NIST risk management thing, which is 80 or 100 pages long.
It's a lot of pages.
And then they download it. Maybe they print it, put it in a binder.
Claude read it
today. Yeah. Well, that's the thing though. So there's one team, like a GRC team, who is responsible for downloading that and then uploading it to the TPRM portal. Then there's a different team that's responsible for doing risk management, and they have no idea what the hell that's going on. Like, they've never heard of this document. They've certainly never read it. Now with AI, you can take this procedure that you're asserting and saying, this is how we do it, and you can technically embed it in the prompt. And you can say, hey, learn this. I didn't think of it as a live prompt embedding, not a model training, but just and by the way, it is the model training too, because it's what's out in the world.
It's in there for sure.
30 years. But let's just say you jam it down the throat of an existing prompt and you say, learn all this. Now go assess the likelihood of sabotage in this environment. And here's the other piece of data you might want to know. it's extraordinarily probabilistic because the procedural guides are so high level when you read through them that they won't help at all with actually doing risk assessment.
Yep.
Which
you
kind
need
of
a strong
sucks. It's
rubric,
like
otherwise
a specific rubric, right?
Yep.
A deterministic rubric. And so it's kind of like the problem until today was the manuals are sitting on the shelf in a different room than people doing the work. Now we have the ability to actually read the entire manual every time you do anything, and it's exposing how bad the manuals are. This is actually pretty useless here, which makes sense because if you have to run something through NIST and update it once every 7 years, you have to be kind of vague.
Better
so
be,
it stands the test of time.
Better be adaptable.
Yeah. So what we are in the business of doing is writing opinionated rubrics that through AI evals are at least much more deterministic than the human version of this process. And ideally almost literally deterministic, meaning you take the same whiz finding or watchtower finding or Vaughan, read that handbook and always will land on probable or always will land on possible. And it hurts a little bit because it is
one adjacency over, but not randomly all over. Yeah.
But again, like as long as you're an order of magnitude better than the humans doing it, which is not that lofty a goal, then you're adding a ton of value.
Yep. No, that's perfect. And I think, it gets to the thing where everybody knows that trying to quantify risk is an imperfect science. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it. But it's all back to the continuous improvement thing. It's like how do we keep figuring out which parts aren't working and how do we drive that forward? I think this ends up being a really good way of looking at it.
Before we go on with the discussion, I want to share something with you that I've been building for the last 9 months to solve the problem of awful security questionnaires. They're, of course, necessary for this sales process to communicate your security posture, but it's not really high leverage work. So we built TrustMind because we want people to get back to doing what matters, securing their platforms or shoveling snow, really anything besides copy-pasting answers about your firewalls and antivirus signatures for the 33rd time. TrustMind is dead simple. Just upload a questionnaire in any format or point it at a web portal and it comes back completed in minutes. Done. Ready to submit, but without the joys of 72 new questions appearing in a portal right before you're supposed to leave for dinner, just because you answered yes to a question that asked, do you use software? TrustMind is packed with advanced features like automated conflict detection, audit trails, adjustable tone, there's a voice mode, and even a customizable self-service portal for your customers to use, complete with a chat interface. TrustMind is built by and for practitioners from people who care about the user experience and who have done hundreds of these for the world's largest companies. We want to save everyone from the pain and agony of having to explain for the 3rd time this month why you don't have tape backups that need to be moved off-site. With TrustMind, everyone gets free and unlimited Word and Excel questionnaire automation, plus a free portal every month, forever. No trial, no credit card, just pain-free living. If this resonates with you or someone you know, head to trustmind.com and sign up for a free account now. All right, let's get back to the show.
Yeah, and you have like all of this, you have even in CRQ, you have the likelihood and then the impact. And the impact, you get into these, and it comes up with things like the SEC's requirements around materiality and disclosing incidents. And
wanted to find that beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. In a way that is relatively deterministic to run it through that same funnel each time. I sometimes like give into dollar and quantification a little bit on the impact axis. I like when people are really hung up on that to say like the highest of these 5 levels is the market cap of a company, the enterprise value. And then orders of magnitudes divided by 10, then there's your high, divided by another 10, you have medium, another 10 low. And it's kind of cool, $1 billion company, $1 billion loss, $100 million loss, and so on. But on the likelihood, and that's kind of what CRQ does, right? It's about dollars. But on the likelihood, likelihood of something happening is just kind of an abomination in CRQ, right? Especially when I see people that put an annualized loss expectancy on risk register entries or on like vulns. Like, there's a $1,213 risk. Ooh, do not say that around adults, or they're gonna, like.
I have had the CFO give me a funny look when I tried that at one point.
Well, I think there's 2 types. There's the CFO that goes, and then as a CISO, you're like, hey, I'm connecting here. This person likes money, and this is what we're talking. It's working.
Yep.
That's not what's going on. They just don't want to talk about cybersecurity, and they're just nodding to get you out of the room.
And they're like, I don't believe your numbers
Things
anyway.
go wrong, they're gonna plow over you and fuzzy math. And what are you doing here? So don't trust the nods.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And I think is there something in your mind that if you're, you're in a security program somewhere, in a larger institution, like where's a good starting point for people as you're looking around? You're like, hey, I don't know if this is really grounded in reality, or we maybe are self-deluding ourselves here a bit. I mean, is there any advice you give folks that are in a situation like that of where to be looking and how to kind of start thinking about culture change? Because I think there's plenty of places that maybe find themselves in that situation. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are thinking that, but they don't really know what to do with that sort of ideal.
Yeah. I think it's never too early to start governance. I never said that before, believe it or not. It sounds like a cool little like website hook. Maybe it will be, but it's never too early to start governance.
You're real fun at parties, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. And what I mean specifically about that is, like we always have companies and handhold them through the idea of literally minting a cyber gov committee and charter and saying meet once a quarter, generally a couple weeks before your board. You don't have a board, whatever, but just start with this. And the key bits of that are the audience and the agenda. The audience has to be cross-functional, because part of the purpose of that, to get right to the heart of your question, is like get a group of people that will argue without you being on either end of it and get out of the line of fire. Right. So if you have enough smart people, if you have a chief legal officer and a CFO and a president, maybe a CEO, don't count on them, they're always busy. CTO, COO. If you have those types of people in the room and you get into a contentious situation where you're like, really, we're not going to do this, or really, we're doing that. Am I taking crazy pills? That's what you're asking. Like, people feel like you're taking crazy pills. That's the solution to the crazy pills problem, is get 7 different people in there. And if all of them disagree with you, then you're taking crazy pills and just get over. If you don't like it, move on. But generally you can find one of those people is going to agree with you without you even framing the question. Be like, we're doing what? Oh, thank God someone else solved this problem. And so get everybody into the room, which is kind of the Joe Sullivan situation in my mind. And I never talked explicitly with Joe about this, I think, but to me, the idea is like, right, the Uber CISO and made a decision around a bounty pay or a extortion, really, that got him in all kinds of trouble and just like turned his life over. And when you look back on it, there was just like a sparsity of evidence that other key executives were involved in the decision. And I bet a lot of that was kind of like they were off the record and all that. And when I look at that, I think, man, having those 7 people in the room and like, let's all, you kind of force people to weigh in and actually express an opinion, things will kind of come to earth, because, they'll have to have a defensible outcome out of the meeting. So establishing that early on, even at the smallest of companies, and say, once a quarter, we're going to meet and we're going to run through some security stuff. And hopefully I'm the only security person in the room. We don't need any more security people here. We need business people. And then for the agenda and the material, I think what we've been talking about a lot in this episode to now, like that threat objective idea, it works there very well. Being able to say to that group, hey, here's a straw man that I'm bringing into the room here. I'm a cyber expert, so I can talk about the x-axis, the likelihood. And I can tell you that people are not targeting companies like ours for sabotage, but they are targeting companies like us for extortion or whatever it's going to be. And then the fun part is, and I think that if we had an episode like what happened in Jaguar Land Rover, or, use other victims sabotage or of extortion, that it would be existential. It would be the top level. And someone in that room hopefully will say, if it's accurate, like, so they were down for what, 5 weeks? Most people are down for what, 2 weeks and all that. Like, that would be awful. We all agree, but no, we're not gonna shut down the company. We have a receivables cycle that's okay. The switching costs of our customers are really high. It would be PR, blah, blah, blah. It would be $100 million thing, or it'd be a $10 million thing, or it'd be a $1 million thing. But no, it's not $1 billion problem. And that's where you get other people to push it down and let them all fight it out without you being on the bad side of either one.
No, I mean, that's great, because they're bringing in the rest of the business, which everyone does have their own perspectives. And I mean, I think that colors it much, in a much more full sort of way than if it's just a security person coming in and saying, I think this is going to cost us X, because I think a lot of people's just instinct to that is going to be to find holes in that and poke holes in it, as opposed to making it an ongoing discussion. So I think that's a really, really great approach to this.
Yeah. I mean, when you bring dollars, I always say half the room thinks you're too low and the other half thinks you're too high, but all of them agree.
At least you can get it out this way. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like no one knows the answer. And so, but it's kind of hard to wrap that around. If you're having a discussion, it's probably some sort of bell curve type of thing of like probability
Yeah.
of, it's going to end up here or there, but we don't know.
Yeah, committees are awful for some things, but for that kind of decision, they're perfect.
I know, we were talking a bit earlier, you were saying something about like vulnerabilities and patching, all that stuff is overrated. I know you don't necessarily mean don't patch, but with all the stuff around, the mythos thing everybody keeps talking about, I mean, what is your thinking about this going forward, automated exploitation of vulnerabilities and, how people think about putting that into the sort of the modeling that we were talking about around, I mean, how do you think about this right now?
Yeah, and going back to the idea that a lot of our non-AI LLMs, meaning like the corpus of beliefs and knowledge that are in our head, we're all LLMs fed to some degree. Going back to the notion, a lot of that was kind of informed by FUD and like people that had conflicts of interest. I think this narrative that CVEs, to be explicit, but vulnerabilities are what causes security breaches, whatever those are, is unfounded. Not unfounded, but it's fallacious. Like in reality, like the Jaguar Land Rover thing didn't happen. I haven't even seen the write-up or the post-mortem on that if it's out there. But I bet it wasn't because of a CVE, and it wasn't because of not patching. Or the Equifax breach was notorious because they were in Capitol Hill and they're in court and they're talking about Struts vulnerability. And it wasn't patched. And I think was that the one where they said an intern didn't patch or something.
I mean, that
like
one was, I think it was old and it was, it was a exploitable RCE on their site. That does seem like probably that one was patching, to be fair.
No, but I was going to use that explicitly because I know that, one could say that, but the reality is that we know that patching is impossible. Like it go back to the 0-day thing, like to put a patch on, there has to be a patch. I mean, the vulnerability has to be known to the creator of the software, fixed before you got exploited, before the adversaries figured it out, and then you apply it. So especially with mythos and these types of things, and I say with mythos, but of course I just mean with the idea that we're going to be able to find these at a higher pace, then you're supposed to defend against things before there's a patch. Or it's a race. The good guys are already glasswing, using stuff to figure out problems in their own product and fix things. Hopefully that's embargoed. Hopefully it's not leaked before they can fix it. But the bad guys also have a lot of compute and they're cranking us out too. And it's almost like Bitcoin mining where like whoever captures the token first is going to get the reward. So when the bad guys figure out a defect first, all the patching in the world's not going to fix it. So I think to look at the deluge of CVEs that are going to be coming out shortly and say, like, this proves we need to patch faster, we need to patch more comprehensively, we need to patch more exhaustively. I think that's extremely flawed thinking out of it. Because for one, I was just going through the fact that it's impossible in some cases that there is no patch, and that'll become more and more true as this gets automated. And on the other hand, all of the impediments to patching are still here, and they're only going to magnify too when you try to do more of it, meaning breaking prod, right? Regression testing, all that kind of stuff. So I think what we need to do, what really we should not let this crisis go to waste. And instead of saying, see, we need to patch a lot better, it needs to be, see, patching isn't enough. Like we can't rely on patching. Like in the mythos proofing, the paper that Gotti at Gnostic, he's everybody's seen this. It was like in a venture LP meeting a few weeks ago, and they cited this without even mentioning, they don't even know who published it. But he put together this pan CISO write-up on the mythos proof organization and that kind of thing. And it was pretty comprehensive. So when it did go into a lot of patch better and patch stronger and faster, and that's not my favorite thing. But it also talked about some things like my favorite warhorse, it's egress filtering. And like being able to, like that strut at Equifax, it got popped. RCE runs on a box in the Equifax production infrastructure, the one that we all know and love that's highly regulated. And then that thing calls out over the internet to attack our controlled infrastructure. And we're okay with that. We think they should have patched it. No one for a minute blinks about how the hell is this production thing able to surf the web? Why is it able to surf the web? You kill egress 28 years ago, like we could have. That's not even going to come up. They could have all the struts vulnerabilities and Log4j and tomorrow.
I was going to say Log4j, same thing.
It's the same thing. And so we need to say, like, assume RCE on anything that's really important and give me your plan on how that's going to be moot and it's not even going to hurt you. And that you can sleep at night when Mythos and everybody else and everything else is just cranking these out.
No, I think that really is the right way to be thinking about it. Obviously, you still want to be patching for all the other reasons, because you could still end up with business logic problems or whatever, where you can exploit it through the app. But getting rid of that entire class of vulnerabilities of someone setting up a reverse shell into your infra is clearly going to be a very big win in a world like this.
Yeah, I remember using Log4j as an example. So we got on this really big campaign about egress restriction at ICE. And, I'll tell you, it's not trivial and a massive incumbent infrastructure to go back and like, okay, we're going to kill everything. You got to figure out.
Sounds terrible, actually, to go back.
Well,
and
yeah, I know.
figure that all out.
You don't have a chance without political.
It's a huge project
to start.
Yep.
Right. You got to have everybody on board and are appreciating it. So I get it. I was very lucky. I had a really good culture that understood it and was able to get it. And we got everybody on board. And so we started doing it. And you can imagine, like, I could tell you the plan to go do it at Jaguar Land Rover tomorrow, whatever. It's like, let's figure out what egress we need first. And then how do you even do that? Well, let's get logs of what people do. Oh, we don't have any logs. Oh, the systems that we really care about aren't flowing through the logs we do have, and we're missing some visibility. And like, okay, I get it. It's not trivial, but it's a lot cheaper than trying to get 10 times better at patching, and a lot less dangerous, actually, because you have a lot of chance to test and view. And then ultimately you say, like, what is it that our systems actually do on egress? And let's lock everything just down to that. And so we had gone through that and spent, it took longer than we hoped, but it got done largely. And we acquired companies, and those didn't have egress filtering for a period until we could go through the same thing for every single acquisition and so on. So Log4j comes out. And what was really cool to me about that moment in time was that at the same time that we were getting, the inbounds and the tweets and look out for this and start looking, and everyone on the planet is looking at things under the covers, like looking at like running massive, basically find commands, like looking for a jar file that has the name with the version, and
right before the holidays,
rename the jar file, right? Otherwise, you're
on a Friday.
Blind. And it was on Friday, yeah. Anyway, he went on and on and on, and finally, you find the 547,000 instances you have, and then you dump all that in the Jira tickets and piss off engineering because they're not even using the jar file, and you're bugging them about waking up in Christmas and deleting this. Well, patching, but they're smart enough to say, I'll just delete it. No one's using it, So that's kind of the mess. But what was really cool at that point in time was that at the same time that adversaries were weaponizing this, and arguably someone must have been popping that 6 years prior, right? But at the time, the adversaries now were playing catch up and figuring it out. Thanks to bug bounty, the good guys were highly motivated to be the first one to report it, that you had an instance, because then they're going to capture $1,500. So this race is going on. And I remember getting the bug bounty reports, even before you see in the logs, everybody scanning for it, but they were some of the first ones. There was parity finally between the good guys and bad guys, which is so cool. So we're running this like bottom up find commands on Unix servers. And then I remember the SREs being really smart and like, let's actually like run top type commands and look through memory and see what's actually running. And if it's the bad Log4j, then that narrows down the window considerably. But nonetheless, we have tens of thousands of these things out there that are bad. And then we got the bug bounty coming in, and we had something in the order of like 20 where they said, we found Log4j and you're on an exploitable version. And we know that. And as good bug bounty researchers, nobody would exploit anything. So we found it, but we paused because we're obeying the scoping statement and we're not going to destroy anything without authorization. And then we went back to them and said, way to go. Cool. Now see if you could download remote code. Like, see if you could actually download a payload.
Just a hello world.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Anything at all. Even just do the download. And because we think we have egress restrictions, right? And sure enough, most of them are like, you got me. Yeah, it's not a P1 anymore. Thanks for letting me test further. While I can verify it's there, I can't actually execute any commands. I don't know why it's not working. Something
so that's actually not a vulnerability here.
And now it's a $200 finding. Instead, whatever. I mean, it's a bad version or whatever. But it was, and more tactically for an enterprise, it was okay. We have 60 days to fix this versus we got to get it done tonight, SLA wise, right? But it was I almost remember like less than 10, like 5 or so instances where they're like, okay, yeah, cool. I got malware down and was able to execute it. We're like, oh, snap, And that was subsidiaries we had acquired, didn't have egress restrictions yet. But that was awesome, right? We're in the same boat as Wells Fargo and everybody else, and scanning disks and finding hundreds of thousands. But we know that there's 5 things like that we can handle on the weekend. And we got those 5 things. I don't remember what we did, if we put in compensating controls or just upgraded the damn things, but that's manageable. And everything I just described, like that works and transcends the mythos deluge of 10x or 100x CVEs.
Well, it's good fodder for the, that continuous improvement loop again of like, okay, well, we had these 5. What happened, in the process that these 5 slipped through? Maybe there was an ongoing project to kind of bring them into the warm embrace.
Thematic. It was great, right? Because now we're going in the governance meeting where quarter after quarter, we'd already been saying, hey, the problem child is subsidiary X. They came on late and everybody said, treat them with kid gloves and don't rush them through integration because it's the cash cow and all that. Well, look, you heard all those headlines. You came in and asked me about it in the water cooler before we kicked off the meeting. Boom, we were vulnerable, but only there. Everywhere else we were cool, right? So it all tied together.
That's a great way to tie it all together at the end, because then it's builds the political capital for you as well going forward. Of like, these are the right approaches. You're kind of thinking about the problem in the right way, because I think there's enough snake oil in security as a whole that
it's tough.
People come in with a very skeptical eye, and they're going to assume you're probably somewhere on that scale until you prove otherwise. And I think that's up to all of us to, the snake oil spectrum. I'll make that my own. Until you prove otherwise. I mean, I think that's a really great way to look at it. I know we're coming up on time here, so I mean, it's been really, really great talking about this. I love the approach to kind of security more generally and thinking about risk and how you manage it. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Oh yeah. Likewise, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And I was lucky enough to see you speak and present to the CISO forum group in San Francisco around RSA. And man, I remember I felt like I was watching a good movie. Like I was just sitting back, eating up everything you were saying. You just had the best slides and the best analysis on AI-ifying the planet. And
get all my jokes out then and get to drop those on everybody. So it's the highlight of my year.
Yeah. Well, great. It was great. I look forward to next year already, but great to speak anytime. And if anybody wants to follow up on everything that I said that may actually be product, and most of it actually is, then like you said, adversarial.com.
And the podcast, you and Sunil have a cool thing going on, right?
And Mario Duarte,
and Mario,
yes,
perfect.
Yeah, actually, the coolest thing to me is that all 3 of us were CISOs and are now founders. And, some of that is like, if you're a CISO and you're thinking about what you're going to do next, and we have some interesting little anecdotes about, what we love or hate about that. But also it's like permission to speak freely. And it's none of that crap where someone says, some country whose name begins with the letter C that I won't, like, I don't even know what that means. We don't have to pretend to do any of that lawyer stuff.
There's a certain amount of freedom to owning
unsponsored
your own paycheck.
Helps the same way too. Yeah. Unconflicted.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Well, thanks a ton for joining, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for listening to the TPRM podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share it with a colleague. You can find more insights and resources over at tprmpodcast.com. And until next time, remember, trust nothing, verify most things, and keep building. That's it for this episode of the TPRM podcast. I'm Nate Lee. Thanks for joining me and my guest today. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, leave us a review, and share the episode with your peers and colleagues. For more resources and insights on building business-aligned security programs and managing vendor security, visit tprmpodcast.com and connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.